Corruption all over the world can hinder economic growth, and very many other effects come from the corruption, which involves abuse of office and very, very many other forms. Here on The Equilibrium today, we are going to talk about corruption and how it is very, very much related with how the economy moves all over the world, whether a third world country, whether a first world country, whichever economy it is. Corruption, as we shall learn later, is one of the big hindrances of the progress of the economy. We shall have different economists on my panel, as always, diving deep into this, telling us more about what corruption can be to an economy. And later on, we shall end, as always, with our recommendations about what can be done, about how corruption can be nipped in the bud, or how we can see how we can live with different forms of corruption and see how the economy grows. Today, as always, I have on my panel the usual suspects, and me as well, the usual suspect. My name is Dan Ayebale, and of course, the gentleman and the lady are ready to give us 1 hour or two of their time and tell us more about what corruption is, what corruption can mean, what abuse of office can cause to an economy. Yes. So let me introduce to you these distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I beg your pardon. To start from right here near me today, I want to do ladies first. I have Christine. Christine, you're welcome. I hope your Tuesday, I hope it was fine. Okay, I also have Darius over there. Darius, how are you doing?
Very great.
You're great. Welcome on the show. And last but not least is Francis Muhire. And I welcome you. I take this honor to welcome you on The Equilibrium on this very 5th episode of the great Equilibrium, where we talk real world economy. Now, we all know what corruption is. I mean, you here on the panel. But maybe our dear viewer right out there may be out there thinking, what is corruption? And it might seem like a weak question to say what is corruption, but I must concede, me as a person, when I was growing up, I misunderstood what the word corruption was. Because there is corruption, there is nepotism, and those words sometimes tend to be misused, or they tend to be mixed up. So I will give it to Francis just in a second or a minute to tell us what is corruption. Is corruption favoritism? Is corruption nepotism? Because if I'm to be honest, when I was growing up, I used to mix up those two. So there might be someone out there mixing up corruption and all the other words that are related. So Francis, as we kick this off, please take us deep into what corruption is. Basically, what do we call corruption?
Thank you, Dan. Good evening to our viewers out there. That's a very good question. In fact, most of the people don't know what actually corruption is. But corruption simply means the misuse of the public power for private gains. And this happens at different levels and has a great impact, on the economy, as we are going to discuss below. But there are different tools of corruption. And the number one tool of corruption is actually bribes. We have bribes, you have embezzlement of government funds, talk about actually, like tribalism or nepotism, And for the case of Uganda, you're going to find that actually it goes beyond tribalism or nepotism. It's about the family where someone is attached to, So corruption comes in a diverse, structure, as we are going to break it down. But it has a very huge negative impact on the economy.
Let's continue on with the show. This is The Equilibrium, and we are just getting started. If you haven't really settled down, please settle, and we talk corruption to an economy, and what it is. Darius, I hope you agree with Francis today.
No, I haven't agreed. I'm not agreeing.
You're not agreeing with him, or if you're not agreeing, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. The first thing I wanted to admit is that defining corruption is a daunting task. It is very difficult because of its ambiguity. And even in academics, we are still struggling with the way how to define corruption. And you see, there are defining corruption depends on the approaches, the aims, and the needs of a person who is analyzing it. Academics has offered 3 approaches on how you can define corruption. First, you can view corruption from a legal perspective. You can view it from a socio-economic perspective. But there is also what is called anthropological kind of approach. But not to go into much of academics and the hard words, from the legal perspective, corruption is defined by basic terms. When a transaction is illegal, then it is treated to be a corrupt transaction. And if it is not, then there is no corruption. From the socio-economic perspective, it is what Francis has defined: the misuse of public office for private gain. Then from the anthropological approach, we tend now to capture in elements of norms, culture, issues of trust. Much as the legal and socio-economic approach hint that corruption is an individual aspect, anthropology tends to capture in the component of collectiveness, that corruption is a collective kind of aspect. So the way you define corruption also, by and large, determines how corruption is viewed, how it is perceived, and consequently, it will determine the approaches or strategies that you put in place to fight it, and also the legitimacy of those approaches. So we tend to define corruption from the socio-economic aspect, and we tend to ignore that anthropological kind of approach.
Why do you think so? Why do we want to depend much on the social perspective?
I've already told it is hard to define. And corruption itself is innately an invisible activity that you can easily see. So by and large, whenever we are discussing corruption, we are describing public sector corruption. And it takes about, I think, 8 components: public sector corruption, bribery, there is fraud, there is embezzlement, there is favoritism, there is abuse of discretion, and there is also what they call conflict of interest. So by and large, we are talking about those components.
Thank you. Corruption seems to be a very broader word than we can imagine. And Christine, here you come in and tell us, what do you know as corruption? The broad side of it, or maybe the word corruption, maybe misuse of office, that's what corruption to you is. You can tell us more.
Basically, corruption is a wide aspect, but just to bring it down to the layman, we try to break down, to come up with something that is easy for even a nursery or primary going pupil to know exactly what we are talking about. Basically, you're in an office, you have authority to do something, you're supposed to maybe offer service to a certain sector of people, but you're not doing that work with what you're supposed to do. So you're using that influence or that position to extort or get favors. You're in a position of, say, you want someone to beg you to do your work. That is how basically I can really break it down to make it using very simple English words. Let me use an example of utilities. Say you've paid your bill. Maybe you want a new connection in your home. You go to say Umeme office. You want the service. You've paid for it, but because someone is using that position, you're in need of that service. You want it. You want your power connected, but because this person is wants you to ask them, to beg them for you to have that service. And Ugandans have come to a conclusion, and it has become a way of life, where people know that citizens are aware that for you to get into this office and you want your services received very early, you want to be served very quickly in a shorter period of time, you have to part with money, and actually some people actually plan for it. So using still the utility example, so some will be like, okay, and the next minute you have your utilities up and running. So it has become that kind of casual thing where Ugandans on a general aspect think it's a normal way of life. Actually, they will tell you that this is Uganda, you see?
So to say this has really gone deep into our culture and how we live, and that is something we shall discuss also later to know why. Why is corruption being normalized? Why are we thinking if I want to go to a police station, if I want to go to Umeme offices to have a connection, I really have to go with something to help me go through that phase of my day. But before we reach there, before we go there to the culture and what really has brought about that kind of living and that kind of if Muganda can call it embera. Yes. So I want to know from you, Francis. We talk of corruption, and we have really discussed it from very different levels. About from misuse of offices, from those very, very, very big scandals, the Temangalo scandals, you know, all those scandals, and then back down to where a policeman takes your 5,000, or where someone, to get a connection of water, you have to pay 10,000. And to ask is, we always say sins are not equal, whatever sin it is, they are equal. I want to know corruption in relation to the economy. Do these different forms of corruption at the end of the day bring about the same impact, or we could say maybe these sins are not equal?
Thank you, Dan. Whether big or small corruption, remains corruption. But of course, the impact varies. According to the Global Integrity Report of 2006, it showed that Uganda loses about 1 trillion shillings per year, due to corruption. So, but as my colleagues have said, corruption ranges from, from different, aspects and sizes. I mean, if, let's say, we have cases where, let's say, the government negotiations going long, and someone out there might ask, why? How will this actually impact me? So I'll give you an example of the Umeme, of the Umeme deal, Uganda and Umeme deal. Umeme, which distributes electricity. So you might ask yourself, how come that Uganda, our electricity, prices are one of the highest in the world? So this all goes to, where you have negotiations between Uganda and Umeme. So the people that are representing the government, yes, who are supposed to be negotiating to get us the fair or the best deal ever, because we have officials who are corrupt, they end up getting, some money. Thank you. Kintu kidogo. And at the end of the day, so you can imagine someone who's going to negotiate on your behalf, at the country, he's asking for some money or some kickbacks. So what do you expect? At the end of the day, you're going to get the worst deal. That's why actually that Umeme deal, due to poor negotiations linked with corruption, we ended up getting a very bad deal. And now the public, we are paying the cost. That's why the prices for electricity in Uganda, the prices are one of the highest in the world. So you see, it will affect you in one way or another. But there are so many consequences, attached to corruption. Something actually, let's go to the public offices. In Uganda, corruption has actually been institutionalized. It's part of norm, it's part of culture. That's how bad it is. So Uganda has been ranked, I think, 137, one of the most corrupt countries. So, but corruption, as we've said that the definition is not, scholars have come up with different definitions. But I want our viewers out there to know, if you're, let's say, in a public office and you're not doing what you're supposed to do, for example, you're in an office, you're supposed to be there serving people, but then you're not there physically. That's why when you go to local government, if I did some survey, when you go to local government, you just find quotes hanged on the chairs. Someone spends a month, they are nowhere to be seen. That is corruption.
Abuse of office.
Yes. And actually, that is just an example, but covers the entire, for example, the public sector. But we don't only have corruption in the public sector, even the private sector, you see. So the consequences are too many, as we're going to discuss, about them.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Francis. The quote on the chair is actually something. If you really think deeper and deeper into what it means, it really symbolizes something big. A court in a chair and someone missing. So that means the owner of the office is the court. All right. Dear viewer, you're still on the Equilibrium, and we're still talking corruption and getting to know what it means to the economic growth, not only in Uganda, but globally. I yesterday viewed kind of a map about the corruption index, and the map suggests that the growing or upcoming economies really have more corruption than those economies that are really developed. I got it over the internet. Darius, why is it so? Why are growing economies really the ones that are really experiencing a lot of corruption, and yet we have the least money in our economy? Or maybe our economy is struggling, but we are really the ones doing corruption the more than the developed economies.
Later we'll speak to corruption and poverty and how the two are related. Usually the interaction between the two tends to, cause what is called a vicious cycle of poverty. Yes, there is some strong relationship between the two, poverty and corruption, but usually the debate is on the causality. The causality is not settled. Which one causes the other? Is it poverty that leads to corruption, or is it corruption that leads to poverty? The two are interlinked, and they tend to create that kind of vicious cycle. But to speak on what you hint on, corruption is a global phenomenon. No country is free from corruption. If you're to look at that corruption perception index, corruption is measured using that element, CPI, corruption perception index. And when you look at that index, you realize that Africa tends to be the most corrupt continent on earth. In fact, that index ranges from 0 to 100%. If you score 100%, it means you're the least corrupt country, or the clean corrupt. And if you're 0, if you score 0, then you're the most corrupt country. In Africa, only 8 countries out of 49 usually score about 40%. The rest score below the average. That is something that we need to worry about. It presents kind of a gloomy picture about Africa and the consequences that are associated with that. When you see welfare countries, most especially in the Nordic region, countries like Denmark, countries like Norway, Sweden, those are A countries. They usually score above 80%. The least corrupt country right now, I think it is Denmark, with 87%. And when you look at the most corrupt countries, usually they are our neighbors. Somalia has always occupied that last position. It and our neighbor in the northwest. South Sudan and Somalia have always switched positions of the last. I think in the region it is Rwanda which is doing well. It is always scoring, I think, 67%, more or less like what the US is scoring, because I think the US also scores about 69%. So yeah, they are almost in the same range. But corruption takes various forms, like Francis was saying. We have the greed versus need kind of corruption. And actually in Africa, most of the corruption which happens is need corruption. Need corruption is when you take a bribe or you embezzle funds simply because you want to meet your subsistence needs of life. There was a study in the DRC, for example, conducted by the World Bank, where it revealed that about 92% of people who are working in public offices could not meet their subsistence needs using their salaries, wages that they earn. Therefore, consequences or chances are very high that one is going to take a bribe. And I think that is also the trend in Uganda. Usually now when you attend some of these public forums, you often hear the term called working poor in Africa. Those who are working are also poor, which justifies the need to take. The greed corruption is really very small in those top government agencies. Talk of the URA, the NSSF, those independent agencies of government. Because when you look at the way how public servants are paid, you'll find that those in independent government agencies earn almost 10 times higher than those in civil service, other public servants at the lower level. And that embeds some kind of culture that we see about corruption. It also relates to the petty versus grand corruption. Petty is where now people steal in small amounts. Those who are in lower ranks steal 2,000. Whereas those who are in those big institutions, corruption is grand. They take in billion US dollars. What does that create it embeds a kind of culture which we usually call a moral hazard. Those who are on top will keep stealing because also the other ones down are stealing. The smaller ones are eating, therefore the top ones also eat. Okay. So it's sort of like that.
Thank you very much, Darius. That's a very insightful submission from Darius Mugabe. Dear viewer, thank you for keeping it equilibrium. Please, if you haven't subscribed, click that subscribe button and you'll be able to get those notifications every Wednesday and you get to know more about your economy. Let's go down to the corruption and all that, the nitty-gritties that involve corruption. We can't talk corruption and we don't talk about the procurement industry. I mean, the procurement side of those guys. And when I say that, I see they are smiling.
That is termed as bureaucratic corruption.
Okay, so in the procurement industry side of it, we really have seen, let's say, in this COVID-19 era where we hear of money being released, but we never see these things coming. We've discussed this over and over again on the previous episodes, but I want to know, maybe starting with Christian, what do you think are those loopholes, those guys in the procurement industry are really exploiting to find that people can really build mansions, and when you ask them how much salary they earn, their net salary is 500,000, but their businesses are multi-billions. So where are those loopholes those guys are exploiting? I mean, in the private sector, in the government, the public sector, can we try to find out where these loopholes are? And of course, at the end of the show, we can maybe give a recommendation.
Looking at the procurement process and what has been happening, just using the COVID era and what the government had to procure. Okay, one of the things that takes me to Uganda, we have the laws, we have the acts, but are they working? I will basically look at the Anti-Money Laundering Act, the Anti-Money Laundering Regulation, and the Financial Intelligence Authority that is in place right now. Now, the acts are in place, but plus the Financial Intelligence Authority, they're all in place. But one of the major challenges that the Financial Intelligence Authority finds is is it capitalized enough to go after all these big individuals? Because when you look at the scandals that we've had in the procurement process, they're not small individuals that are involved. These are very influential individuals, but will they adhere to the set institutions to go after them? So that is where the entire problem begins from. Yes, because corruption is one of the it's one of the it's one of the ways through which money is laundered. So if we have the FIA in place, but still, even if they try to question, since they have the capacity, they have the authority, they'll be able to beat the system.
Okay, thank you very much, Christine. Let's go to Francis. Francis, I want to have your comment about why is the procurement process still very hard to beef up and see how we can really seal these holes which are leaking, both in the public sector and the private sector. Public sector, we can say maybe, like Christine says, these guys are the bigwigs, but we still see this even in the private sector. Where are the loopholes in the procurement processes of different companies and organizations?
Thank you, Dan. As Darius has categorized it, we call that bureaucratic corruption, and procurement is that aspect where we are seeing too much corruption, linked cases. So we've seen very many cases where, let's say, prices are inflated. You've talked about that scenario during the this time of COVID-19, where the government had to procure food. So you have this scenario where prices are inflated when, let's say, of course the government always deals with the private sector. If it is about, let's say, the government, procuring, whether it is ranging from stationary to land, prices are inflated. You saw the NSSF Temangal land, the price was inflated. So all this is corruption, and that's how the government or the taxpayers' money is wasted into corruption. But how dangerous is that? This leads to income inequality, because it is benefiting few people who are stealing, at the expense of the public. So procurement is another serious, part or aspect where corruption is linked. And talking about the loopholes are everywhere, most especially in the public sector. And corruption has been normalized, something that is abnormal but has been sugar-coated, normalized to the extent that really these culprits are maximizing all those loopholes. Yes, yes. And this is dangerous for the economy, by the way. Someone may not take, as we've said, let's say Uganda is ranked 147, among the most, corrupt countries. Someone may take that as, something light. But trust me, the consequences are too much. First of all, it inhibits FDIs, or foreign direct investments. Before foreigners want to go and invest, they first make a research, Both they look at the history, the background of the country, and even the current state. And it's unfortunate that Uganda's, corruption history starts right away, even during colonial times. You're going to find that even the chiefs never used to account for the taxes collected. So the corruption in this country starts right away from the top up to the grassroots, from the LC1 chairperson up to. That's why
money 5,000 for for a letter.
For a letter, that is corruption, because it is not, it's not stipulated anywhere that someone is supposed to be paying it. Uganda, there's these common phrases that, welcome to Uganda, Uganda'S, from above, all that means. These are unusual vocabularies that have actually come up because of corruption. So it inhibits, foreign direct investments. Personally, I witnessed a case in this scenario where an investor from South Africa has been coming to this country. He has spent over 4 years coming, trying to start business here, but he has failed. Do you know why? Because of corruption in this country. Everywhere, whichever offices he goes, the ministry, everyone wants money. He told me at the beginning of this year that, I've given up about Uganda. Maybe I should go to Rwanda. You see, these are the real things which are happening. You see? but the consequences are too much. Still talking about, let's say, procurement. We have, government bids and contracts. You want to give out, let's say, who's going to construct this road. Like when the government is, giving out those contracts, corruption is too much, orders from the above. But how is that dangerous? You're going to realize that someone who's going to win this contract, they are not actually efficient, They are not worthy of actually, winning those contracts, but they end up winning these contracts because they have bribed, you see? And at the end of the day, you're going to get poor output, whether it is in infrastructure. That's why you've seen we spend too much money on the roads, dams, electricity, but at the end of the day, the quality of output is poor. And there is actually, recent studies have shown that now companies budget for those corruption kickbacks. They put a certain amount of money in their budget to pay, to win such a contract. Other countries that are good at that, especially Chinese companies. There was a scenario in Kenya where the, where one of the ministers, I'm not going to mention the name, but she admitted having said dealing with China is really good. It's pretty good. Why? Because they know what it means with those kickbacks. In fact, he said the money comes in sacks. The money doesn't come through financial institution. The money comes in sacks.
Okay. Brief, short and sweet from Francis. And I come back to Christine to talk about the body of this discussion. We've really been introducing this. But now let's go straight into the body, the gist of the whole of the whole meaning of this discussion of corruption. What does corruption? I know there's a lot of talk about income inequality and all that. We want to dive deep into what corruption is or means to an economy. What does it affect it directly and indirectly? Let's start with you, Christine.
I'm going to answer this question using a statement that Pope Francis made, where he said that corruption is paid by the poor. Now, I want to relate that statement to our Ugandan economy. Now, for example, if say you as a government, you've contracted a company to make a road, Katosi Road, for example. And because a lot of money was lost in that deal, so shoddy work is set up. It hits us directly as an economy, everyone, because a road, this is a public good that is used by everyone. So within a few years, we shall see potholes all over, and we have to still budget for that road again in our budget. So that is how it hits us directly. Now, even just the cost of doing business in Uganda, because a study that was conducted, Ugandan business people involved in business in Uganda, one of the constraints that they pointed out, after the high taxes, the next major constraint they have is corruption. Because each step you want to take, you have to part with money in those different offices. You want to get a license, you have to part with money. Now, the money that this person or individual would have used to invest, make it bring in more channels, more channels in the company, that would mean employing more people on a larger scale. But remember, instead of making it big and creating avenues for employing our citizens, this investor is parting with that money in form of bribes. So it still gets back to us. And you know what having a big unemployed population does to an economy? You will have theft, you will have all those different cases that would have been preventable. So it still hits us as an economy. Even the government losses that we make. uh, the government can actually end up paying money for undone work. For you, you're paying thinking that this work is being done. You say you've contracted people to a company to make a road. Then by the time they get to make the road, the government you've already budgeted for that money and you've paid it out. But what is actually being done on ground is not equivalent to the money that was released. So at the end of the day, that citizen that is already poor, because having created that income inequality, it's the high-end people that are normally involved in that high-end scandals. So with this income inequality, if a government has budgeted for Katosi Road and it's not done in that specific time, or after some time it is you get potholes, still they have to rebudget for that road at some point in time. And who pays the taxes? It is the general citizen. You're paying it in form of VAT, income tax. So that is, it gets back to us as individuals.
All right, thank you, Christine. Darius, over to you. Dear viewer, thank you for still keeping it equilibrium. We're talking corruption, and you could, we've been here for almost an hour, and we've discussed a lot. And I think one takeaway is that sometimes it starts with you. It's the culture that starts with you. So we talk of how the economy is directly affected by corruption. And we may maybe talk about shooting your own foot when you get corrupt. So Darius, how do we explain to the dear viewer out there that corruption is, corruption affects the economy in this way or the other way, directly or indirectly? Please talk to us in 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, we re-echo much of what Christine has said. Corruption direct to the economy hampers economic growth, or largely gross domestic product. You see, in economics, we tend to emphasize that term, that metric, because almost everything that matters in life is related or correlated with the term GDP. Happiness, for example. You cannot be happy when you don't have some income in the pockets and the other associated things. On a global scale, for every 1% increase in corruption, there is 0.13 percentage points reduction in economic growth. That also translates on average about $425, which is lost in terms of per capita income. That is the income per person that every individual should be having. So whenever corruption increases by 1 index, on average, the income of a Ugandan reduces by 425 US dollars. So what does that mean? That actually corruption in the long run will retard efforts on poverty reduction. Because if this money that is supposed to go to the most vulnerable Ugandan to increase his or her income is stolen, then efforts to reduce poverty are hampered. And what does that mean? I've already told you there is that inextricable linkage between poverty and corruption. Once corruption is high, poverty also increases. And poverty again will also trigger corruption. Because the poor, yes. So it becomes more of silent corruption. Because I earlier mentioned that most of the corruption is need corruption. People, what they earn is not enough to sustain their subsistence needs. So in any case, they go into public sector or in any position, they want to take bribes. And that's what we have always warned. if that corruption culture is kept for a very long time, then it sort of creates what is called adverse selection. Now, public sector is attractive to people who have that corrupt element in their minds. Whoever goes to public sector wants to take a bribe. When I was in one of the offices, shortly after my studies, I'd gone for a certain document in a public office, and reaching there, a person tells me that you should speak like a man in order to get a document. At first, I thought the statement is offensive. I wondered, what is this man meaning? And at the end, I was denied the document. Then I reached...
There used to be a saying of put a stone on your papers so that they're not blown by the wind when you're applying for a job.
When I reached home, I narrated it to my friend, and was like, the man was meaning that you put something on the table. I went back the following morning, I put something, and I got the document.
You became a man.
Yes. But also, the other thing is that corruption tends to increase the cost of services across the public sector, because once the money which is supposed to run the public sector is stolen, it means that government needs to look for other avenues to get the money and pay these services. The other thing could be that what Christine has already talked about, income inequality. Corruption tends to increase the incomes of those who are in positions. And once that happens, also there is a likelihood that transaction costs are going to increase, because once a small sector of the population has more money, in the basic economics, when your income increases, the rule of thumb is that usually you want to spend more on goods and services. So at the end, triggering that demand, it will increase the cost of transaction, or what we might term as inflation. But you see, one might say corruption actually triggers aggregate demand. I have had that debate in a lot of public forums, that if someone is corrupt and is going to spend the money in the economy, then that will trigger aggregate demand, and that kind of thing tends to create inflation. And the immediate effect of inflation is that it always reduces the purchasing power of money. You have a lot of money, but you cannot buy as many commodities as you wanted. So that increment or that reduction in the purchasing power of money usually tends to erode the aggregate demand that we always talk about. But also, one last thing. Yes, corruption also tends to affect trust levels in government institutions and across the entire society. And trust is a very important component for economies to operate efficiently. Right now, Ugandans no longer trust government, neither do they trust themselves. It is very hard in Uganda right now to find, a man operating a business with a spouse. One puts a small kiosk here, the wife, and the husband also puts another kiosk there. And they are doing related items. Those are same items that if they merged, they would enjoy economies of scale. So trust is very critical.
Thank you very much, Darius. Dear viewer, you're still on the Equilibrium, and we're almost getting to the end of the show. Thanks for keeping it Equilibrium on Neo ETV. And to remind you, we are live every Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. So be sure to catch us. And you can also leave your comment, by the way. You can also be part of this conversation by leaving your comment under that video on YouTube or on our Facebook and Twitter pages. That is the Equilibrium. Before we can come to the end of this interesting show, I would want to have recommendations from Francis, and maybe last comments. But before that, you will have 3 minutes only. Before that, there is something I don't want us to leave this place when I was talking about. I am a journalist, and we can't really leave media out of this. We can't talk corruption and then leave without hinting about media. Journalists are actually people, I mean, the media industry is tasked with unveiling these kind of scandals alongside the other, what they call them, these three: executive, judiciary, and legislature. Journalism is the fourth estate, they call it, and the media, I mean. So, me as a journalist, maybe I might not give that fair comment here, or maybe as a host, I might not give that fair comment. But there's conflict of interest. But I want you, Francis, to, as you give your final remarks, to also tell us what you think the media has really done. Has it played its part as per se to their mandate? Or, I mean, you know, the investigative part of journalism. You know, even not even the investigative, deep investigative part of it, but I want you to rate it or give us your view about what the media has done to maybe help curb corruption.
Thank you, Dan. The media plays a key role in any society, but it depends the environment, you know, it is in. You know, they say freedom is not free, and talking about investigative journalism, I see here in Uganda, journalists, there are those journalists actually who are trying to do a good job, but I know they are finding it very hard because, as I've told you, the environment in which they're operating in is not conducive for them to do their work. The same thing goes to researchers, you know. If you're a researcher and you want certain data, my fellow researchers here, they know what I'm talking about. So it's really, the environment is not conducive. But just shortly to go back to the impact of corruption on the economy. Corruption is a big, if not the worst disease of any economy. And talking about Uganda, you know, one scholar called Park Hang-min said that an increase in the corruption index translates to a reduction in economic growth by 0.5 percentage points. But why? One, corruption breeds the shadow economy. What do I mean by the shadow economy? These are illegal activities and transactions that happen in an economy. Don't get surprised in an emerging economy like Uganda, where the shadow economy is bigger than the real economy. I will not go deep into that. Maybe that is a topic for another day. But another aspect we should not forget is that corruption impacts the health and the education sectors of an economy. You'll ask me why. Not looking at the teacher that they are getting little money and they don't have avenues where to be corrupt. If you do your investigative research, you'll get some surprising results. But why? This all goes to how resources, yes, this goes how to resources are allocated. How much is put into the health sector? You know, because let's say there is tax invasion, then the government ends up, you know, collecting less in revenue and ends up funding inefficiently to these sectors, both health and the education sector. Of course, for the health sector, we've seen where, let's say, some of the medics, you know, or health personnel are, you know, getting bribes from the patients. You know, you've seen that happening. Then the other point I want to make is that we should not forget about the corruption scandals that have happened in this country. There are big corruption scandals that have happened in this country, right away from 2017, the Chogam money. Yes, 2007, the incident was actually reported in 2011. Then the LC1 bicycles, where 4 billion shillings disappeared. It was meant to buy, you know, bicycles for LC1 chairpersons. That was under the Ministry of Local Government. The Temangal land, where 414 acres of land, you know, they were bought at 24 million, and yet Knight Frank actually came out to value the land and put the price at 18 million. You see, that is a big chunk of money. Then we also had other scandals like, you know, the recent one, Bank of Uganda. Bank of Uganda, you remember that money that, you know, the printed money that was coming from France. This was around, the amount that was stipulated, supposed to be coming, was around 350 billion Ugandan shillings, which was packed in 20 pellets. But afterward, they realized that actually there were more 5 pallets belonging to private entities. And actually, it is actually the governor, Bank of Uganda, Professor Mutobire, who came out as a whistleblower to actually, call in for anti-corruption unit of State House to come and investigate. So you can imagine more 5 pallets of printed money belonging to a certain group of people. Now, the other scandal, look at the Entebbe Expressway. I want us to compare the Entebbe Expressway and the Thika Expressway of Kenya. The Entebbe Expressway is about 53 kilometers. Each kilometer was budgeted at $9 million US. That is $9 million US per kilometer. And the expressway of the Entebbe Expressway has 4 lanes. The Thika Expressway of Kenya is just 50 kilometers, but the price per kilometer was put at $7.2 million US. I want you to see the difference. Do you want to tell me that, let's say, the input costs, the materials, ours are more expensive than that of Kenya? Definitely no. So you're going to realize that the 53 kilometer of Entebbe Expressway cost Uganda a tune of 476 million shillings, as compared to a 50 kilometer of Thika way in Kenya that cost Kenya amount of 360 million US dollars. So you can see the levels of corruption. And these are the biggest scandals we have in this country. We've not seen people being taken to prison, The few people you've seen, those are small cases and they run away with it, or those are the few people they bring on board actually to sacrifice. But the biggest scandals which have happened in this country, and actually which I also am assuring that most scandals are going to come out of this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. Because in emerging economies where corruption is above the abnormal levels, people or the culprits tend to take advantage of that panic. So that's why I can anticipate, I can even put money that at the end of the day, the scandals, the corruption that are going to come out of this period, they are going to be immense. So,
your recommendation as you wind up?
Yes, my recommendations are that, 1, you get what you pay for. So the civil servants, when it comes to allocating these resources should be allocated where they need to be so that at least people get some good money. Then the other recommendation is that we have to punish the culprits. Not just, because you see in Uganda, it's in Uganda where the culprits of corruption, they are treated as heroes. You've seen some of them coming from jail, and they're received by a big chunk of people. In fact, they mobilize people over the country, like even from their deep villages. They come, like they are received as heroes. Therefore, people need to be punished. I'll give you an example of Rwanda. I saw a minister. He had to resign because he was involved in this corruption scandal. Just 500,000 Ugandan shillings. He had to resign. How many people have you seen resign in this country involved in the corruption scandal? Most of them go away with it. Therefore, we have to punish these people. If the society, even the young generation, see that if you're corrupt, if you're involved, you'll be punished, then they will know this is bad. And that will change the entire setup of our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Let's come to Darius as we wind up. 1, 2, 3 things. Your comment about the media, and then Francis talks about punishing. I don't know the punishing you mean, because we've seen prison sentences. What do you think of going deeper to maybe take these items or assets they have acquired and getting them back? I mean, what's your view about that? And then your final recommendations in 2 minutes, sorry.
Media, globally, media and journalism in specific is also facing challenges. Journalism has this talk of fairness and balanced. But the term fairness, far from ridiculing it, has never existed. at least in economic sense. What is fair? In its ambiguity, the word fairness is not in the purview of economics because it's very subjective. Because we often ask, is it fair, for example?
Of having two sides of the story, and then sometimes it should be the truth, not two sides of the story, you mean?
Yes, because journalism is also driven by interests. And you know it is also commercialized. So at the end of the day, they want to get stories that will make them achieve their interests. In fact, I've read that journalism is no longer about widening the perceptions of the public, but only oriented towards opinion stars. It's only about opinion stars. Whenever there is any component affecting the society, media will always rush to certain groups of people because they are the ones who give certain opinions, and then the society frames them to be true for the entire society. In economics, we call it the fallacy of composition. What seems to be right for a small group of people is taken to be true for the whole society. So media is only around that aspect. I don't think it has served its purpose to the fullest because of the underlying conditions that does affect societies or environments in which it operates. To corruption, I think it is everywhere, we can agree, but we shouldn't use that theory of whataboutism to justify that we need it in Uganda. Corruption, be need or be greed, should be condemned, and it has consequences on the larger setting of the society, as we have discussed. About recommendations, I think it is high time Uganda we considered institutional reforms. I know it will take a great deal of political will to do such. Government needs to come one day and close some of the agencies, ministries, and departments and simply walk away. Close and walk away without even offering any such kind of explanation. Because I've always emphasized that a huge government grooms corruption. And that corruption also attracts a rocket demand of thugs within the government. And when you maintain it over time, those thugs also become rotten and perf with arrogance. You usually see them even when they are corrupt, the arrogance they use, because they know government is very big and therefore it is not easy to monitor them. But also the institutional reforms should be guided by enforcing of property rights by the rule of law. The issue of property rights is critical in Uganda, and mainly land rights. You know, land is the most critical factor of production in as far as the world is concerned, because every other economic activity happens on land. And there is a saying in Africa, an African proverb, that if you want peace, or if you don't want to die, you shouldn't try on two things: land and women. Those are the two sources of death in Africa. And in fact, if you were to look at the crime rate in Uganda, a bigger percentage, over 80% of the crime rate is related to those two aspects.
Yes, thank you for your views. Oh, This is interesting. Every other show that brings a very interesting statement.
I had one more other thing to say.
Yeah, but I'm trying to say you have 30 seconds.
The issue of incentives is also critical. We need to harmonize that payment system. We should pay labor according to its marginal product. Labor should be harmonized. The payment of labor should be harmonized. This business of paying a huge wage to a certain group and paying the other one small will not help us. What France is talking about, that we need to punish them. Who will punish them if they are not paid? A policeman who is supposed to enforce that punishment is not paid well. So how will we make that enforcement? Thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much. There is insightful views as well over there, but you didn't tell me if this issue of maybe this idea of taking the assets, can it work? If you're found corrupt, everything of yours is taken.
Shift from this way of treating symptoms rather than rather go
Into the bloodstream.
yes, you diagnose the disease and get it off.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Still the equilibrium, and we're getting to the very, very last part of it. Actually, on the very last part of the equilibrium, we are having our views, our last views, and our very last recommendations. Yes, and I can't stop thanking you, dear viewer, for keeping it the equilibrium and keeping on viewing our videos. Share with a friend, share with your family, share with your brother, your sister, your spouse. Share these videos, and please ask them to subscribe as you've already done. So if you haven't, the button is there, right there, red button. It's very easy to just click there, and then you'll be on the equilibrium. You shall get all those notifications. Let's talk to Christine as we wind up. Last but not least, you can have your comment about the media. No, the media, right? Let me have you get a comment. Let me have your comment about a different thing, about the IGG's office. Do you think it has really played their role? How do you rate the IGG's office in this case of corruption in Uganda? And then your final comments.
I will sum all that in a few statements. One, I'm going to paraphrase Joe Biden's statement, where he calls corruption as a cancer that diminishes citizens' faith in democracy and erodes their instinct in creativity and innovation. Now, when you look at Uganda as a country, we have the different laws in place. We have the Leadership Code Act, we have the Corruption Act, we have the Whistleblowers Act, we have the Anti-Money Laundering Act, we have the Anti-Money Laundering Regulation. We have so many of those acts and regulations in place. We also have a division in the High Court that handles such corruption-related cases. Now, asking about what the IGG has done and to comment on how I can rate them, I'm not going to give them a substantial figure that maybe 1, 2 out of this, but from the experience and what has been happening around, with everything that is, with all the cases that keep happening around, even if you investigate a case and it goes to court, but it never comes to completion for us, the citizens, to appreciate all these structures in place, you will not have done any, let me say, like your due diligence or something that will make us, as the citizens, to believe in what is in place. So that tells you, of why the corruption scandals are still happening. And just after these COVID funds, we wait. Other cases are going to come in that are going to blow our minds away. So it is a cancer that has to be worked on as a collective effort, right from the president himself to the little citizens that are still coming up, if we are to change the way we look at things. And let's look at corruption. Let's stop using, you know, instead of calling it using the straight words, let us be real. We shouldn't come up with these sugar-coated names, whereby instead of calling it theft, this one is corrupt. Let's stop using these sugar-coated statements that make someone think that it's actually another kind of crime that they have committed. I think when we put all that in place and we have that political will, yeah, we shall get somewhere.
Thank you. We come to the end. The corruption topic is as broad as the assets of the corrupt officials. And we can spend the entire day here talking corruption because there's a lot we haven't tackled. Maybe we shall have this topic again because I feel we can talk deeper into this. We haven't talked about the president. The president is always talking about, I mean, it's always on his mind, on his mouth about the corruption scandals in Uganda and what he has done and how he works as lyric or what he has really done to curb corruption. So my producer shall give us another show next time and we shall talk about corruption more deeper and deeper for you to understand, our dear viewer, and know more about what corruption, a simple 100 shillings that is really that crosses hands in an abnormal way or under the table, what it means and what it can affect the economy or the society or the well-being of you, the dear viewer, or your family or your offsprings and the generations to come in future. Keep it the equilibrium. We shall have more of these videos every week on Wednesday. Wednesdays at 9:15 p.m. we are live. You can stream live on YouTube or Neo ETV, and you shall catch us live with this amazing panel of economists. I had Francis Muhila over there. Thank you for honoring my invitation, Francis. I had Darius Mugabe over here and Christine Masio to say the last but not the least. And my name is Dan Ayebale. Till next time, bye.